My name is Frédéric Varone. I'm professor for political science in the Catholic University of Louvain, which is the French part of this university, about 30 kilometers away from Leuven, in a new stability of policy actors and on providing effectiveness and efficiency of the policy measures. And this is a kind of secondary legitimacy, or if you want, it refers from a democratic point of view to democracy as governed for the people. So people need to receive good public services. Thus, policy evaluation must be considered from a policy point of view as a management tool, but also from a broader democratic perspective as a very important issue. And this double dimension, input legitimacy, output legitimacy, is also addressed by the White Book on Good Governance of the European Commission. I don't know if you know this White Book on Good Governance. It's quite common. It's very interesting to read. And it has some impact on water framework directives, on discussion among the institutions at EU level. And according to the definition of good governance of the EU, two good governance criteria address directly the issue of empowering the policy actors, or are related to the input legitimacy of a public policy. The first one is openness, the second one is participation. They are the words that are quoted by the EU. And I just quote the EU there, the Commission. Regarding openness, the Commission said, the institution should work in a more open manner. They should use language that is accessible and understandable for the general public. This is of particular importance in order to improve the confidence in complex situations. For participation, the Commission states that the quality, relevance and effectiveness of EU policies on ensuring wide participation throughout the policy chain, from conception to implementation. And improved participation is likely to create more confidence in the end results and in the institution which delivers policy. These are the two dimensions as very broadly defined by the EU Commission. Relating to the output legitimacy, they formulate three criteria, or three dimensions. The first one, which is directly related to policy evaluation, is accountability, this famous word in English that we cannot translate in French, for example. And accountability means roles in the legislative and executive processes need to be clearer. But there is also a need for greater clarity and responsibility from member states and all those involved in developing and implementing EU policy at whatever level. So the member states and the EU and all the implementation actors should be more accountable. Policy should also be more coherent. So policies and action must be coherent and easily understood, which is not self-evident if you read the European directive. Coherence requires political leadership and a strong responsibility on the part of the institution to ensure a consistent approach within a complex system. And last point, which is also directly related to output legitimacy and to policy evaluation, is effectiveness. Policy must be effective and timely, delivering what is needed on the basis of clear objectives, an evaluation of future impact, and, where available, of past experience. Effectiveness also depends on implementing EU policy in a proportionate manner and on taking decisions at the most appropriate level, which refer to the subsidiarity principle. So, from a democratic point of view, once again, accountability is a crucial aspect of policy evaluation. So we need to spend some time on policy evaluation. It's at least my argument. And an evaluation should tend to describe, interpret, and explain clearly where public monies was spent, what effects it produced, and how the spending was justified. Maybe you already have some similar argument by Gerd Burkhardt when he was speaking about the financial aspect of public management. So for sure, policy evaluation is a very broad issue, and in my short presentation, I'm not able to address all the relevant questions. I will just discuss 4 points. I hope it's not too basic, but if it is the case, please let me know. I will try to discuss with you the definition of policy evaluation on some of the relevant dimensions of each policy evaluation. I will then address the question of how to measure the policy effect of a public policy, because this is the first task, the first challenge of policy evaluation, to identify the net effects of a public policy. I will then thirdly address the question of judging the value of a policy, how to make a value judgment about a public policy. And finally, I will discuss the institutionalization of policy evaluation in various countries. So I have made a study on 21 countries just to know which country is pioneer in developing evaluation, which country is a laggard country regarding policy evaluation. So I start now with the first point, which is the definition of policy evaluation. And as for every other concept, there are as many definitions of policy evaluation as there are political scientists, or even more, because political scientists made more than one definition of one concept. And I will not undertake an exhaustive review of all these definitions, which will be quite boring. But just let me stress that policy evaluation implies at least two dimensions, a measurement dimension and a value dimension. And here you find three definitions. We clearly focus on the first component of policy evaluation, which is a measurement dimension. So evaluation of a policy is recognizing and measuring its specific effects. That's a definition from a French guy, Delot. So the focus is put on effects, on specific effects. And this is one of the major challenges for policy evaluators, to know what are effects and what are specific or net effects of a public policy. Second definition is proposed by Rossi and Freeman. I think you get a copy of one of his chapters. And Rossi and Freeman, it's a huge book, but it's Bible for policy evaluation. The standard handbook for policy evaluation that are given as mandatory lecture. So evaluation is a systematic application of social research procedures for assessing the conceptualization, design, implementation, and utility of social intervention program. So the main focus is here on the methods and the systematic application of these methods. Policy evaluation is a scientific exercise, if you want. You need strong methodology. Third definition here from Carol Weiss, which is an American, BA, the utilization of policy evaluation. She said that the purpose of evaluation research is to measure the effect of a program against the goal it set out to accomplish. So it's a question of effectiveness. As a means of contributing to subsequent decision making about the program and improve future programming. So you have an additional aspect here, which is that evaluation should be useful for political decision. It should help to improve future programming, which is one point of view in the literature. But it's quite important because politicians decided to finance or not to finance a policy evaluation depending upon if they can expect or not expect some useful comments on their own public policy. The second dimension of every policy evaluation is value judgment. In English it's quite clear, evaluation has the word value within. In French too, évaluation, valeur. In German it's already more complex because you should say Bewertung with the word Wert and not Evaluation, which is already said in Germany. So Evaluating a policy is reaching a judgment on its value. That's the definition of Vivre, which is also a French guy, on which proposes definition after the definition of Delo, just to show that policy evaluation is not just measuring policy effect, but also giving a value judgment. Michael Scriven, I think he's the guy who invited the first evaluation story about God and Lucifer, formulates the following definition. Evaluation is a process of determining the merits, the worth, and the value of things like policy, or you can also evaluate an organization or a program and so on. So the question is then how to define what is the merit, the worth, and the value. And you give you have a first answer to this question by the definition proposed by the European Commission, which says that evaluation is a judgment on the value of a public intervention with reference to criteria and explicit standard. And they mention efficiency, effectiveness, and so on. So according to this definition, you need to mobilize some criteria, some reference value to make a value judgment on a public intervention. If you want additional definition, I can provide you with a lot, but I think it doesn't make sense to go further on this track. Just remember there is this measuring and this value judgment dimension, and both need to be combined. Those need to be combined. So I can put it once again with some graphs. The first ambition of policy evaluation is measurement. And you have this picture, which is the front page of a handbook in French on policy evaluation. And there you have the evaluator who is putting his boomerang in the air, goes through the program, and it can then measure how far are the effect, how good are the effect of this public policy. And this first dimension is really a scientific challenge. So it has something to do with the cognitive dimension of policy evaluation. The main challenges here are to apply the good evaluation design and methodology. And you have a lot of standard handbook on methodology of evaluation. You can make a whole program during 4 years just on evaluation methodology. I will not address all this method here, but this is a huge task to find, to experiment, and to improve methodology of evaluation. I will guess that this is under the primary responsibility of the evaluator. The evaluator has to apply the good method in order to measure the policy effect. On the other hand, once again, God and Lucifer, evaluation always implies valuing the identified effects according to criteria, and this is much more a political issue. So it has something to do with the normative dimension of policy evaluation. And here's a question, Yes? Sorry, yes. So this is the evaluator, Lucifer, giving his Gutachten, his report, his recommendation to gods, once again the politicians. And here the question is how to formulate the question of the evaluation. How to define the criteria of evaluation. If you evaluate a public policy according to appropriateness, efficiency, effectiveness, or economy, you have very different answers to the question. And it is really the job of the politicians, of the political actors, to define the evaluation question and to define the criteria that will be applied to judge the public policy. The evaluator cannot substitute to the politicians, because this is, at the end, a value and a political issue to define what are we looking at when we are evaluating a public policy. And sometimes the politicians have very strong difficulties to understand this, and they ask the evaluators what do we have to look at instead of proposing and defining the evaluation question and the evaluation criteria? Okay, besides these two dimensions, very basic dimension of an evaluation, we can also distinguish further dimension of evaluation. And once again, there are a lot of relevant dimensions, and I will just put here some dimensions that are of interest and that are to be discussed in each policy evaluation. The first question is, who is doing the evaluation? And you can choose between an internal or self-evaluation and an external evaluation. In the first case, self-evaluation, evaluation is performed by the organization which participates directly in its implementation, or by an evaluation team which belongs to the administration in charge of the public policy. And of course, there are good reasons for doing a self-evaluation. I mean, there is a good knowledge about the public policy to be evaluated. There is a high accessibility to the data for analyzing the implementation and the effects. There is a higher acceptability of the policy evaluation. But there are also, of course, some disadvantages or negative points. So people who are implementing the policy and then evaluating them miss the critical distance to be very critical to the public policy. From a cognitive point of view, they don't know about alternatives, for example. They are blind for alternative. Or the inertia of the implementation hinder the conception of a new implementation framework. On the other hand, external evaluation is undertaken by a public organization which is not involved in the public policy, for example, the Supreme Audit Court, Cour des Comptes, Supreme Audit Unit, I don't know how to translate it in English, or by an academic, by Pedro, for example, from the KUL, which is evaluating energy policy of Flanders, or by a private consultant. Policy evaluation is a huge market, by the way. And private consultant try to promote policy evaluation in various countries, for example, in France. And here, once again, there are some advantages of external evaluation. There are no personal link to the public policy, so there is more freedom of speech. You are not linked to the decision that could be taken on the basis of the evaluation recommendation. But external experts also face some difficulties. They need more time to understand how the public policy really functions, to understand where there are some conflicts, to find the people or the program who died in a corner of the administration. And they can also face a very strong resistance or opposition from the administration when they try to collect data. As knowledge is power, they have difficulties to get the right data to assess the implementation and the effect of the public policy. So, in any case, you have to choose between both or to combine both with a team within the public administration, coaching, for example, an external academic evaluator. But you have to choose, yes.
You indicate that evaluation should be a scientific process,
yeah.
But the politicians have to define the criteria on which the policy will be judged. Are they always capable of defining criteria that can actually be measured or that actually measure what you would like to know? Because this is sometimes what I experience in contract research as well.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the main problem is that, according to my own practice, they formulate questions and they are not really evaluation questions in the sense that you cannot answer this question with a sound academic methodology. That's one part of the solution, one part of the problem. The second part of the problem is that when you have all stakeholders around the table defining the evaluation question, you have too much question. Or they disagree about what to look at. Do you want to focus on efficiency, on how the administration implements the policy? This is the main interest, for example, the administration of the parliament who is funding the public policy. And if you have the target group of the end beneficiaries of the public policies, they are much more interested in the effectiveness, in the last ending effects of the public policy. And then you have a problem because you have too much question, too much criteria on how to choose. And I mean, as an evaluator, I cannot say, okay, I take this, but I follow this one. It's a political process in this sense, that you need, when you are doing an evaluability assessment at the very beginning of the process, you have to bring the people together and to find a consensus on this. And there are some techniques for finding a consensus. But in this sense, I mean, it's always political. It's always political. Because if you, as evaluator, you say, I will look at this, you can be sure that at the end of the evaluation, somebody comes and says, that's not a good question. That's not a good question. So in that sense, I mean, it's a political process. I don't know if you agree with this point of view. I mean, it's just my point of view.
I agree that it should be the case, but sometimes it's difficult to get it in practice in that way. Yeah. And to get some criteria that can be really used in an academic way.
Sure. It's always a negotiation process between the evaluators and the commissioner of the evaluation. It can take...
Can you make suggestions?
Yeah. In my point of view, you always have to make suggestions and practical suggestions, or to reinterpret the question or the criteria and to show what it will mean for data collection, for the time for collecting the data, for the cost of collecting the data, and so on. There are no golden rules in evaluation, but in general, in my own practice, I consider 1/3 of the time of the evaluation and of the cost of the evaluation is about defining the evaluation contract. So, what are the questions, what are the criteria, what are the data that we need, and what are the expected results. And you also have to negotiate at this stage the utilization of the results. You have to foresee how to present the result and how you use this in the decision-making process. So the more time you invest at the very beginning of the evaluation, the better then the evaluation process and the political utility of the evaluation. This is my experience, if you want. Yes.
Because Rossi also speaks evaluation has to depart from some criteria. And the best thing is that this criteria is defined by the people who define the initial input, politicians. But on the other hand, it's rational. I mean, it's too simple rational. You have the criteria which are defined by the people who want to define, and then you have the result. So does the goal match the result or not?
Yeah.
So finally, I'm working as a clinician. That we have an enormous list of possible ways of defining group evaluation eventually, which was my problem with the book when we got to the book. I didn't quite catch the idea that there's some system or a theory which you go to a government and you see that, okay, you have this situation, that means I will use this method, or we have this situation, I will use this method.
So for me, each evaluation is a singular case, and it really depends upon the context. I mean, when a parliament committee asks you an evaluation, not the same thing as when an administration creates. So I have no golden rule or theory about how to fit the expectation of the commissioner on the methodology of the evaluators. I mean, too much?
Uncertainty.
Yes, but I mean that's what makes evaluation interesting. when I Michael Scriven once said, evaluation is nervous-making. Really. And then Staffelbein comes and he said, Michael Scriven once said evaluation is nervous-making, and it is. Because really it's half a scientific process and half a political process. And as evaluator, you should not be too naive when you enter the scene, because there are conflicts within an evaluation, and you have to handle with this uncertainty. It's not the scientific work only. I think you as evaluator, you must keep the scientific part through the methodology. But all the political part, all the value part is much more depending upon the stakeholders and first of all of the politicians or the commissioner of the policy evaluation. So this uncertainty is inherent in policy evaluation, in my point of view.
But then again, you have a readiness to ask the answer. You have goals, you have the context, you have the structure of the program, you have the budget for financial evaluation, very, very important. You have a personal evaluation. Who works there? You can have a cultural evaluation. It's a very constructive thing, maybe. The way that the process is going, different stages, different parts of it, and different actors actually defines the way that the evaluation is.
Exactly. But I mean, as evaluator, when I start a discussion with a public body, I ask, which process do you want? Do you want a closed process or an open process? And you have people saying, okay, you have more technocratic policy evaluation or more pluralistic policy evaluation. So should we open the evaluation process at the very beginning, and everybody has one possibility to say something about the value criteria that will be mobilized or not? But at the end it's a political decision, because they pay for the evaluation. So it's applied research. Yes?
What's the relation between performance measurement and the evaluation?
Mm-hmm. I can come to this, but I can give you a first answer right now. Evaluation has to do with the final effects of a public policy. Performance measurement can focus only on administrative outputs, so end product of the implementation process. You just look how the administration functions and how performant they are when producing the outputs and delivering public. And if you restrain the evaluation to the performance of the administration for output production, I will don't call this an evaluation. You are not looking at the end effects, you are just looking at the outputs. So it's much more something like control, monitoring, performance measurement, all that stuff that new public management tend to push forward. Just focus on the internal efficiency of the administration and look how good or bad, costly or not costly are the outputs. But for me to speak, if you want to speak about policy evaluation, you have to look at the end results of a public policy. And the end results can be measured only in civil society by the target group and the end beneficiaries of this public policy. I will be back with this question when we will discuss the evaluation criteria. This is the first part of the answer. What is the subject of the measurement? Are they the outputs or the end effects, the outcomes of the public policy? The second part of the discussion could be, do you intend to explain why we have these effects, these outcomes, or just to measure them? And in evaluation, you always have, come to this, the intent to explain why some outcomes appear or do not appear. So there is an ambition to explain the causal link between all the policy chain elements. In monitoring, for example, it may observe certain data and react directly to an increase or decrease of one indicator without trying to explain how the various data are linked causally. So policy evaluation, it's much more a causal approach than several managerial tools such as monitoring, performance management, and so on. Yes?
Sorry, what's the idea of black box evaluation?
Yes. Okay, I can. Do you know what ex ante, ongoing, ex post evaluation are?
Yeah. Yes.
Everybody knows. Okay. When you look at the black box evaluation, you just say there are some inputs. What is going on during the implementation process is a black box. We don't look at. We just can measure the outputs, and then we will look at the outcomes. When you make a comprehensive evaluation, you try to understand the whole chain, the whole causal chain. So you deconstruct what is going on here in the implementation. For example, you look very carefully at the interaction between the administration and the target groups. That's what it means. So the text of Rossi explains that you must understand the program theory. If you want to understand the program theory, the various hypotheses that underlie the public policy, then you will do a comprehensive evaluation. If you don't care about this, just take the objective and the final outcomes, and we know it's a rather linear, technocratic process between them, you just make a black box evaluation. And when I speak here from evaluation, I'll always mean comprehensive evaluation. I don't think that the public policy is so linear, so previsible, that you can take away the implementation process and the interaction between the administration and the target groups. That's what we generally mean when we speak of comprehensive and black box evaluation. Okay, you already know what is formative and summative evaluation? Okay. No? Not really? Okay. When you speak of a formative evaluation, you mean that you do the evaluation for the manager of the public policy or for the direct protagonist of the public policy, and the main target is there to help them to improve the program. So you try to give as soon as possible feedbacks and to induce, to launch learning process within the policy sector, within the policy network. When you do a summative evaluation, the actors or the stakeholders of the public policy are not directly involved in the policy evaluation, and the evaluation is said to be recapitulative when it aims at accounting for the action and for the outputs. It's much more like a control. The users of the evaluation are in this case much more the funding bodies of the public policy, and not necessarily the public administration which is in charge of the program. So here, formative in the sense that you try to bring all the relevant people of the public policy within the process in order to give very strong and rapid feedbacks and to improve the program, to launch learning process. Here it's much more control of accountability, and the main targets are much more the politicians we define or finance the public policy, and not the implementers of the public policy. But I mean, these dimensions were defined a long time ago in the literature, and every public policy evaluation has both sides of the coins. I mean, when you are undertaking an evaluation, have some element who go in direction of improvement, and some elements which go in direction control, accountability. Is it clear enough or not? I don't know if I'm clear enough. I'm afraid not. Okay. What are the functions of evaluation? There are a lot of functions of evaluation that are most of the time not explicit, and that as evaluator you must find out. And Chelimsky, who is a very famous evaluator in the United States, identified 4 main functions of an evaluation. The first one is program improvement. So it's more or less what I've said under formative evaluation. The evaluation should produce information to improve the program. The audience of the evaluation is typically the program planners and implementers. And evaluation should induce learning processes. That's the definition of formative evaluation. You can also insist more on accountability. It has more to do with summative evaluation. The evaluation should determine if the program expectations are met. And this is a crucial question for the taxpayer and for the decision makers who allocate public money to a specific program. So in such a case, a funding agency, a governing board or a legislative committee are interested in such accountability-oriented evaluation. But you also have evaluation that are not intended to directly inform decision related to specific public policy. And they are more dedicated to contribute to social science base within one specific sector. And this knowledge could be very useful, for example, for the planning of a new program. And in such a case, the audience of the policy evaluation is quite diffuse. And last but not least, and this is always very frequent in the practice, you have true objective of an evaluation that have nothing to do with obtaining information about the program and its effect. So an evaluation could be a delaying tactic to appease critics, for example, or to postpone difficult decisions. It's the same way you can appoint a committee at the parliament to study a problem rather than to act on this problem. And an evaluation could be also launched because the program manager thinks that it's a good public relation actions. Just speak about our policy through a policy evaluation, or you want to impress potential funding agency, or evaluation could also be commissioned to provide the public context for a decision that has already been taken behind the scenes. So I was confronted sometimes with an evaluation where I know that the true objective of the evaluation was to terminate the program. So before the policy evaluation results were known, the main objective of the commissioner was just to terminate the program, and he needs some data to legitimate the termination of the program. Or the most dramatic situation is when they want to fire out an administrator or the director of public services, and they just commission an evaluation to prove that he is incompetent, for example. So I mean, once again, there is a lot of uncertainty at the beginning of every evaluation because you have to combine at least this dimension. You have to ask very critically, how is a good evaluator? Is it a good time to do the evaluation? Do we invest enough money, time and skill to have an explanatory evaluation? Do you want to recapitulate the main results or to induce learning process? On what are the real functions, the real ambition of the policy evaluation? And you have to be aware of this and not to be too naive when as an evaluator you enter such a process. And all these dimensions are not typologies or categories that should be interpreted as a continuum. But you see quite easily that you have to make a good combination of the 5 dimensions. For example, an external, ex post and summative evaluation whose principal function is to provide accountability for a specific policy is coherent. You can live with this. On the other way, if you want to undertake an ongoing internal and formative evaluation, then the most principal function should be to improve the implementation and effectiveness of the public policy. So you have sometimes combination of this dimension of evaluation that are not very coherent or compatible. For example, the time aspect is a very important one. At which time do we launch the evaluation? And if we launch the evaluation ex post, can we still launch, for example, the formative evaluation that induce learning process, or maybe the political inertia, the past dependency of the public policy is so bright that you have no more chance to revise the implementation structure. So just think about this, and you have a whole checklist of this in the literature to know in which condition you intend to perform a policy evaluation. Okay, this was about the first point, definition, dimension of policy evaluation. You could imagine that a little bit boring, but I present also. Sorry for the delay. I now turn to the second point of my presentation, which is measuring policy effects. Measuring policy effects. At this level, I think there are three main challenges for the evaluators. And these challenges concern the difficulty to test the program theory underlying a public policy, to measure the net effect of a public policy, and to produce counterfactual evidences. So to estimate the situation and the evolution of the situation of public policy had the public policy not be implemented. I will discuss these three main challenges. And I start with the first challenge that may be formulated as follows. The evaluator must follow, both conceptually and empirically, the outcome line or test the program theory of a public policy. And in fact, each public program or public policy is based on such an outcome line or causal chain or theory of action or policy rationale or theory of social change. You have all these terms in the literature. And this outcome line consists in beliefs, assumption and expectation about the nature of the change brought about by a program action, on how it results in the intended outcomes. This outcome line or program theory is most of the time implicit, so you don't find the program theory in document directly in a clear and understandable way. So the evaluator must reconstruct it. The main task of the evaluator is to reconstruct the program theory. But I mean, it's quite normal for a policy evaluator to adopt such a reconstructivist point of view. I mean, the term of public policy itself is an analytical construction. You have a question?
I can understand that to be able of measuring and following that thing from the system could be to the outcome, but not to the impact. Because the reality is too complex to follow the change that is described in the theory. So, my question is, do you think you really can measure if the impacts are produced by public policies?
I think this is the first challenge. How to do this?
Do you think it's possible or not?
I think in some cases it's quite possible. It's quite possible. But I think there are 2 points in your question. The first one is, can a public policy have an impact in the long term or in the society? Or are there too many factors so that a public policy cannot influence social reality?
I think public policy has impacts, but but
Yes.
which ones, we don't know.
That's why we are doing policy evaluation. Yeah. I mean,
But, okay, that's the aim, but it's possible to achieve it?
yeah.
I don't know.
I will show you example how I could understand that you are skeptical about policy evaluation, but I could show plenty of evaluations that go until the end impacts, or can show that there are no impacts of the public policy. If it will be really impossible to do this, you will have no policy evaluation, and nobody will commission such policy evaluation. So I can't think that it's a problem that is in principle
I think that in fact now there are many evaluators who are recognizing that, and for them they are saying that now the evaluation is becoming something like use the information that institutions and agencies produce in order to understand what the administration is doing, but not planning evaluation. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, policy evaluation is just not one message. There is a lot of debate about these topics. But I mean, in principle, I will disagree with you that a policy evaluation could not try to isolate the impacts and outcomes of a public policy. It depends upon the public policy. Some are very complex, some are very simple, very basic.
A simple one, for example, vacuums, or typical examples where it's really easy, there is no use. It's not useful because it's obvious. And when it will be useful, you can't do it. So, okay. I suppose that with this argument, this class doesn't have changed, so.
No. But I mean, it's a good argument. It's a good argument, but I will affirm that as an evaluator, you should always intend to go as far as possible, and try to look at the final impacts. And if not possible, go one step back in the implementation on outcome chain. But what is important here is that you try to demonstrate this outcome line, this outcome chain. And I mean, it's not just a fiction of the policy evaluator to have such a causal mechanism in his head. When a public administration is doing something, it's because it thinks that what it's doing has some impacts. And people have in mind sometimes very crazy causal models. Very crazy causal models. And the critical function of policy evaluation is just to show that these models do not function. So it has a critical dimension which has some political value. And in most of the case, you have
value, of course, because I think that politicians, they are not really interesting if that is exactly a product of their policy or not. That's a scientific question that maybe the paper will resolve. I think that now politicians, you know that they move the evaluation in order to obtain the results they want to hear or they want to see. Or not.
That's when you enter such an evaluation process, you are a very naive evaluator. I mean, no, it was I was saying before. You must be sure of what is the true objective of the evaluation, and you will not provide some scientific valid data to prove what the politicians want to have proven. I don't think that's the role of an evaluator. No, it should present an objective way to demonstrate how the causal mechanism of the public policy functions and how they can be measured in reality. But I will show you example of evaluation who are very useful and which goes until the outputs, impacts, or even outcomes.
If you can imagine one now, I don't know, because maybe I'm the only one interested in this.
Yes.
I just think you are very skeptical, in fact, because are trying to say is that in fact just social sciences are not like natural sciences, or the things that we do research on, it's the societies or laboratorium. So you cannot control all events, but it's just the task of the evaluator to try to map all the context factors that could have also had an influence on the impact. So, for example, if you here in Leuven, very real situation, government decided to put flash posts along the, you know what flash posts are? So if you're driving your car and you're speeding, then it makes a photograph. Okay. So, well, government decides to put these flash posts, say in June, and then in August they come to the press and say, well, we have put 10 flash posts and now there are 10% less accidents and there are 20% less bikers killed. Well, but maybe that's just because of the fact that there are no students during August in Leuven, but the politician would say, well, my policy has been very effective. It's the evaluator that has to say, you have to look at the context too, and that's just our task as a social scientist.
And it's so difficult to be sure that there are no more variables. You know, there are many evaluations.
Yes, but
that if you see all the line of hearings from 2 years until last point, you can see that the inertia is nothing, you know. Usually that's the result of many evaluations. I mean, that's the more typical example about things related with traffic problems. There's a famous evaluation in Barcelona related to the use of the casco, the helmet by the motorcycle users. Okay, at the first time they saw that less people were killed, but if they saw all the time before, not only the last 2 months, or but in a bigger period, it was impossible to say that it was because of the.
But I'm just one argument. That's a standard problem. I mean, reality is complex. Everything is linked to everything. But when you have to evaluate public policies, the public policy said, if I do this, I will have this impact. Just test if this link is plausible or not. And of course there are other influences, and I will come back to this. And you have some methodology to try to isolate the influence of the other factors. But if you disagree that you can prove that there is a strong, a weak, a conditional link between two phenomena, a public policy and the impacts, just forgot also the world science. Because the world science is about trying to have some link between the type of the voters and the type of the governments, between the type of administration and the type of reforms and so on.
But in natural science and world, I think that now, in nowadays, scientists know that they are not, they don't know the truth about the natural reality, only that things that work. Okay?
Yeah.
Because each 30 or 40 or 50 years, they discover a new theory that can explain the same a little bit better.
Yeah.
So, and I think that, okay, that your way of explaining is beautiful, is perfectly, and it's...
I didn't even not start. I mean, to explain how to deal with these three problems. But
I think that maybe it's an impression map for personal experience, and I think that it's something, first of all, it's very difficult to understand the complexity of society, and secondly, it's something very influenced by political environment, and it's going to be like that, because if you don't have money. I mean, to be trying to do it independently good because you don't have math. So, but what I asked you before, that if you know, these new evaluators who have decided not to make evaluations in this way, but only making judgments for this evaluation from the results of all the informs. And that, I think that because they are recognizing that kind of evaluation starts.
Yeah, I mean, this is why I present these two dimensions. This is exactly why I present these two dimensions. If I bring here Delors and Vivre, and they both speak English better than I do, so it will be clear. Delors will say, okay, evaluation is about measurement, is about methodology. How can we produce a value judgment, even with participative methods? On the other hand, Vivre said, as you say, no chance to measure anything. No valid measure, no possibility. Just bring the people together and say, okay, take a criteria, equity. Everybody has something else in mind under equity, and they negotiate, and depending upon the power relationship between the actors, the present or not present, some mediator, you come to a final statement, yes, this public policy is equitable. Okay? That's another way to do evaluation. What I mean is that you need both dimensions. And both are imperfect. I mean, the people arguing that you cannot measure effects, but you can have just to produce value judgment, have some methods, more participative methods, and they say the people who are participating to the value judgment formation have their own measurement of effects, depending upon their point of view. And they will bring it in the discussion. But I mean, it's also very critical not to have an objective measurement of effects, if possible. Excuse me.
People are you're always evaluating something. It doesn't matter whether you're doing it on the basis of evidence or it's just your opinion. Because you experience policies, and you have a feeling in your gut about whether it's a fair or a bad policy. And an evaluator is trying to put some form of measurement on that, because everyone already has a value judgment about something.
Yeah.
So it's not perfect, and it's certainly not all-encompassing, but at least it gives better measures about what was the good and the bad, the unintended and intended effects. So
that's the point here. I mean, some people also argue, going a step further, evaluation of public policy doesn't make sense. The final evaluation is through election. And if people are happy, they will maintain the government, if not, it's change. I think that elections are not the best way to evaluate the contribution of public policy to solve problems. That we have to go much more carefully, sector by sector, if possible with some methodology and with a participative process. That's the only ambition I attributed to policy evaluation.
I just wanted to add something to what you said, because actually, and what Karen said, it makes sense since at some point the whole idea of public administration would be to provide something in the interest of the public. But if you do not know where the public stands in one issue, then how can you possibly deliver this? So could it be said at some point that just a little bit of what it's about policy evaluation could also be discovering what the problems are? Problems that probably are caused by other policies. So eventually when discovering problems, you're actually evaluating previous policies. So you're actually evaluating previous policies and discovering their flaws that makes you lead to another policy, right? So that could be an argument for,
This is exactly what you said, that it's critical thinking, that you cannot really establish the causality, whether this is really...
Yes, you cannot, but then again the point that Pedro made. I mean, yes, it is not like in chemistry.
Evaluation,
we have to kill ourselves.
It has a flaw, it is conditional, it doesn't work, there is no evaluation theory accepts, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that there is no truth.
Yeah.
There is a fact, which is a fact in some certain conditions, but evaluation also it is a framework, it has a framework. And then the problem emerges, for example, you have an evaluation of a substance, but this is on a vertical, this is only one sector. But you have problems within this, we can have problems within the same sector, or with the impact of the sector, which derives from a different sector. And then evaluation will be judging an absolutely different situation. It will have an absolutely, to some extent, inadequate results just because another sector has an impact on this sector, and this was not included in the model. So in this case, I want to say that probably one solution would be to have evaluators or evaluators.
But meta-evaluation is standard practice. I mean, that's synthesis of evaluation. If you mean, on the same public policy, you can commission 3 evaluations with divergent methodology or even question or criteria and just bring them together. That's also possible. I mean, there are a lot of mechanisms to try to be as good as possible by applying methodology. But I think wishful thinking is not a bad thing. I mean, is it better to stop the policy cycle here without evaluation or to evaluate them? I think it's better to ask at the end, what are we doing? Are we doing the right thing? Are we doing the thing right? And I mean, if you invest 1% of the money you invest in the world policy for policy evaluation, it's a huge amount of money for policy evaluation. You could improve much more the public policy on public spending. So
invest whatever in order to obtain a result, because the politicians want to use it to sell their policy. I don't know if it's fair.
So you address the question, what is going on now when we have evaluation results? What are the politicians doing with this? Could they instrumentalize it for their own purpose on their own? Maybe possible, maybe not. But you overestimate the capacity of policy evaluation to reorientate, to bring a new policy cycle. Don't put too much emphasis on the political power of policy evaluation, I think. No, not at all. Yeah. Which one? This one? No?
Yeah. You just said that evaluators must follow their outcome line
yes.
program theory. So I just want to say that every policy maker has its own program theory.
Exactly.
And he behaves according to this theory. And evaluator, he simply looks at this program theory, how it was implemented, and then he corrects, he makes also his own program theory correctly. Like someone starts the war against some other country, keeping in mind that it would solve the problem of terrorism. After that, you can evaluate that and you say that program theory of that person was wrong. And made some other progress.
I mean, when you start an evaluation and we ask the people, what is a program theory? If you make interview with 15 people, you have 15 program theory. And the crux of the evaluation is to show, programmation, design of the public policy is not clear enough. Within the same services of the public administration, the target groups are not even the same. Or the objectives are not clear at all, and so on. And you have to bring it on the paper and let the people discuss about this. And to know what are the strong expecting link between what the administration is doing, what is the change of behavior of target groups, and what are the final outcomes. I mean, it's a time where you can conceptually reconstruct the policy, show how inconsistent it could be, and how to improve it by redesigning the public policy in a more coherent way. So this is, yeah.
I agree with you that there is a value in evaluating in the most scientific way that you can find, but there is a difference if you see this value in pointing plausible explanations for certain developments or certain results or certain problems in policy cycle. But that is different from if you are trying to really measure and prove a causal relationship between the policy and the result. And I think very often for politicians or for civil servants, it doesn't matter if this is really a causal relationship that can be proved. But from a scientific perspective, you should always try to reach that. But I think this is a very big difficulty because either you could just say, well, if it is not very likely that we will achieve the goal to prove causal relationships because of the complexity of reality of society, then it would be even worse to say, well, then that's not doing it at all anymore.
I understand your point, but I mean, first try to explain the whole chain. When you have all the elements, you can bring them together to have a value judgment.
Explain, that's different than prove.
Yeah, explain is different from prove, yes. Sure. But, I mean, I don't want to appear as being an hardliner for causality and so on, but how to tell it? I just want to go 2 or 3 steps further in order to show how we can tackle this problem and what it means to produce a value judgment without a good causality analysis and so on.
And the value.
And value of it, evaluate it, merit of it. Okay? So I just start once again with challenge 1. It was just a formulation, not the answer. So if the first challenge is to follow conceptually and empirically the outcome line, then you have to present this outcome line. So we have to make a break at which time? We can't make it now? It will be good. Okay. No, I mean... Okay, let's make a break.